The year was 1246, and whispers of dread passed through the villages like winter winds. Far beyond the rolling fields and crooked forests stood a castle so ancient that no one could recall when its stones were first laid. Its jagged towers pierced the sky, dark against the pale moon, and travelers swore they heard cries carried on the night air from deep within its walls. The people called it Castellum Tenebris, the Castle of Shadows. Few dared approach it, for it was said to house not only the Lord's court but also dungeons where the inquisitors plied their dreadful craft. The church called it a fortress of truth, where heresy was burned out like rot from wood. But peasants told a different tale, of screams echoing beneath the earth, of men who entered the iron gates and were never seen again, of secrets buried deeper than any grave. Around the hearths, stories spread. Some claimed the torches lining the castle never went out, as if fueled by something unnatural. Others whispered that the walls themselves seemed to breathe, drawing in the souls of those who entered. But most fearful of all were the rumors of a chamber below ground, a place so terrible that even the guards refused to speak of it. A chamber of confession, they called it, a place where words were torn not from lips, but from the soul itself. It was toward this castle that our lone traveler now made his way. Driven by reasons not yet clear, he pressed on through the autumn fog, the shape of the fortress growing larger with every step. His heart beat heavier as the road narrowed and the iron gates loomed before him, black against the dim light. He paused, the cold air stinging his lungs, and wondered if the tales were true, or if they were but shadows born of frightened minds. Yet as the wind shifted, he thought he heard it. A cry, faint but unmistakable, rising from beneath the stones of the castle. And in that moment, he realized the rumors might not be rumors at all. The path to Castellum Tenebris was neither straight nor welcoming. Twisted trees leaned over the narrow road, their gnarled branches scraping like skeletal fingers. Mist clung to the ground, curling around the traveler's boots as if trying to pull him down into the earth. Each step seemed heavier than the last, weighed down by the growing sense that he was walking not just into a castle, but into a trap woven by shadows themselves. Villages passed in silence, save for the occasional dog's bark or the faint ringing of a distant bell. When he asked the villagers about the castle, they turned pale, their eyes darting to the woods, and shook their heads. "Do not go," one old woman whispered, clutching her shawl. "There are things in that place that do not forgive. Men have gone in, and never returned. The walls take more than life. They take your hope, your memory, perhaps even your soul." Despite the warnings, he pressed on. There was a pull he could not explain, a force that seemed to hum in his bones whenever he neared the castle. The sun sank behind the hills, leaving the fortress in a cloak of twilight. Torches flickered along the walls, their light dancing across carved gargoyles whose eyes seemed alive, following his every movement. When he reached the iron gate, it stood massive and cold, etched with strange symbols that made the hair on his neck rise. He knocked once, then again. A moment later, the sound of footsteps echoed from within, slow and deliberate. A guard appeared, a hulking man in chainmail, his face shadowed beneath a great helm. "Who comes to Castellum Tenebris?" His voice was low, grinding, like stones rubbing together. The traveler swallowed hard, the weight of his journey pressing upon him. I seek passage," he said. "I have matters of importance to discuss with the Lord." The guard's eyes glinted. "Many come with that claim. Few leave." He stepped aside, letting the gate creak open. The air that drifted out was thick with damp and decay, carrying a hint of iron. The traveler's stomach clenched. Beyond the gate, the courtyard stretched into darkness, silent except for the occasional creak of the castle's timbers and the whisper of wind that seemed almost like voices. As he stepped inside, the gate groaned shut behind him, and with the final echo, a chill settled over him, a certainty that crossing this threshold had changed everything. The traveler's boots echoed across the cold, uneven stones of the castle courtyard. Shadows stretched like dark fingers from the high walls, moving strangely with the flicker of torchlight. He caught sight of figures ahead, tall men in blackened armor, their faces hidden behind visors, standing like statues at the entrance to a massive hall. One of them stepped forward. The clang of his chainmail seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. "State your business," he demanded. His voice had a rasp, as if unused to kindness. "I seek an audience with the Lord," the traveler replied, trying to steady his voice. "There is information that must be brought before him." The guard studied him, tilting his head slightly. "Many who enter here claim importance. Few leave." A pause, and then he motioned sharply. "Follow us, and speak little. The walls hear more than men do." They led him through a labyrinth of corridors. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the smell of damp stone and something else. Something old, something that seemed to cling to the very walls. The torches burned dimly, casting long shadows that danced across tapestries depicting knights and saints, though the saints' faces seemed twisted in quiet agony. At the end of a narrow passage, they reached a heavy iron door. Beyond it, the sound of chains rattling faintly echoed, and the traveler felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine. "This way," the guard ordered, pushing the door open with a groan of hinges that had not moved in decades. Inside was the castle's inner courtyard, or what passed for it. Here the atmosphere was heavier. The walls of the hall were lined with men-at-arms, their eyes sharp, their hands resting on the hilts of cruel-looking weapons. Some bore collars of iron. Others carried the instruments of punishment. Whips, manacles, and devices the traveler had only glimpsed in whispered legends. "You will wait here," one guard said, his voice cold, slicing through the air. "And remember, we see all, hear all. One wrong move, and—" His words hung in the air, unfinished, but the meaning was clear. The traveler's heart pounded. He realized then that this castle did not just hold power, it was power, and power that demanded obedience. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the hall, he knew, the dungeon awaited. He swallowed hard, stepping deeper into the darkness. A faint whisper reached his ears, almost too soft to hear. "They watch, always." The guards led him down a spiral staircase carved from black stone, each step echoing as if the castle itself were groaning in disapproval. The air grew colder with every turn, damp and heavy, carrying a metallic tang that made his stomach churn. Torchlight flickered along the walls, revealing streaks of something dark. Old stains, perhaps, or shadows that moved when he wasn't looking directly at them. At the bottom, they arrived at a heavy, iron-bound door. One of the guards unlocked it with a key that looked forged in darkness itself. The hinges screamed as it swung open, and the traveler was confronted with a long corridor, the walls rough and unyielding. Torches flickered along its length, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to crawl and twist across the stone. The corridor ended at another door, slightly ajar. From within came the faintest sounds, muffled voices, the scrape of chains, and an occasional low groan. He could see iron bars and doors set into the walls, each leading to rooms so small and shadowed that they seemed to swallow light. The first glimpse of the underground prison struck him silent. This was no ordinary dungeon. Its cold, narrow passages seemed designed not merely to confine, but to strip hope and sanity alike. The air smelled of damp earth, sweat, and something darker, something lingering, almost alive. "Do you hear them?" one guard said, stepping close. "Those who scream are not always the ones who suffer most. Some die inside long before their bodies are broken." The traveler's pulse quickened. The dungeon stretched into darkness, a labyrinth of despair that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He tried to look away, but the iron bars, the shadows, the faint movement within the cells. It all drew his gaze as if the place were calling him, daring him to step further. He realized, with a cold clarity, that whatever brought him here, he had no choice but to go deeper. And then, from the farthest corner of the corridor, a shadow moved, too deliberate to be mere darkness. It paused, and he felt knew that unseen eyes were watching him. The traveler left the oppressive shadow of the dungeon behind, stepping into the village that clung to the castle's base. The air here was thick with smoke from cooking fires, and the villagers' faces were drawn and wary. He sought information, hoping to understand what horrors lay beneath the castle walls. Few were willing to speak. Those who did lowered their voices to whispers. "They say there's a chamber," an old man murmured, his eyes darting toward the castle. "Not just cells, a place where the mind itself is tested. The inquisitors call it the chamber of confession. We call it the heart of shadows." A woman added, clutching her shawl. "Men go in with secrets in their hearts. They leave a hollow. Some speak of screams that pierce stone, that echo in your dreams long after you wake. They say the walls themselves are hungry, and the floor drinks despair as if it were water." The traveler felt a chill, the hairs on his neck rising. He had seen the dungeon, yet even that seemed tame compared to these whispered stories. "Is it true," he asked carefully, "that people never leave?" The old man's eyes darkened. "Some leave, but not as they were, and some never leave at all. There is a key to the chamber, but not one made of iron. It is given only by the inquisitors, and it opens more than a door. It opens fear itself." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the traveler noticed the villagers hastening indoors, their gazes lingering on the castle like those who fear a storm that never comes but always threatens. He realized that what awaited him was more than mere stone walls or iron bars. The stories suggested a place where fear was crafted, refined, and unleashed, not just to punish the body, but to trap the mind. The chill in his bones deepened as he turned back toward the castle. Somewhere in the shadows, beyond the walls, the chamber waited, and he could almost hear it whispering his name. No sooner had the traveler returned to the castle than he was seized by two guards, their grip unyielding as iron bands. Confusion flooded him. What is this?" he demanded, struggling against their strength. "You know why," one guard said, his voice flat, devoid of mercy. "The Lord of Castellum Tenebris does not tolerate doubt. He does not forgive whispers of dissent." They dragged him through the dimly lit corridors, past shadowed windows and vaulted halls where tapestries hung heavy with dust and sorrow. Every step echoed like a warning. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words died in his throat. It seemed the castle itself rejected his voice. Finally, he was thrust into a hall that smelled of cold stone and candle wax. A long table dominated the room, behind which sat robed men with stern, unreadable faces. The inquisitors. "You are accused of heresy," one intoned, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "Speaking against the faith, harboring dangerous thoughts, daring to question the word of God." He paused, letting the accusation hang in the air like a blade. "Your actions have summoned judgment." The traveler's heart pounded. He had come seeking truth, seeking understanding, yet now the truth was irrelevant. Only the accusation mattered. Chains were fastened around his wrists, biting cold and firm. The inquisitor's eyes seemed to pierce through him, probing for secrets he had not even admitted to himself. "Do you confess?" one asked, leaning close. His breath smelled of candle smoke and fear. I do not understand," the traveler whispered. But even as he spoke, he realized that in this hall, understanding meant nothing. The walls seemed to lean inward, the torches flickering like accusing eyes. Outside, the castle groaned as if acknowledging his plight. The echoes of distant chains and muffled cries reminded him that many had stood here before him, and few had left the same. And then the head inquisitor leaned forward, a shadow across his face, and said words that would chill him to the bone. "Tomorrow you will answer for your soul, but tonight you will wait." Night fell over Castellum Tenebris, and the traveler was left alone in a cold, narrow cell. The stone walls pressed in on him, damp and rough beneath his fingertips. Every sound, dripping water, distant chains, the faint shuffle of a guard, seemed magnified, echoing endlessly in the darkness. Time became meaningless. He counted the beats of his own heart, the slow tick of shadows on the wall. Outside his cell, muffled voices whispered through the corridors, speaking in tones too low to understand, yet heavy with foreboding. Every creak of the floor above felt like a step closer to judgment, each groan of the castle like a sigh of the condemned. He tried to recall why he had come here. What purpose had driven him to this ancient fortress, to face suspicion, accusation, and now isolation? The reasons seemed trivial, even foolish, in the shadow of the castle's oppressive presence. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, he could not tell. The torches flickered outside the bars, sending shadows dancing across the stone floor, and with each movement, he imagined figures emerging from the darkness. Inquisitors, guards, or worse, things born of the castle's very stones. A faint scratching sound came from somewhere deep in the walls. He froze, listening. The scratching grew louder, deliberate, like nails tracing secrets too terrible to speak. The traveler pressed his back against the cold stone, realizing that he was not just waiting for the verdict. He was waiting for something to come for him. And then, as the candlelight outside his cell guttered and dimmed, he heard it. A whisper, impossibly soft, threading through the silence. "Do you wish to know the truth?" At dawn, the traveler was led through twisting corridors into the heart of the castle, the Hall of the Inquisition. The room was vast, its high ceilings shrouded in shadow, supported by pillars carved with grotesque figures whose faces seemed to shift when one looked askance. The air was thick with the smell of candle wax, damp stone, and something older, something like despair. At the far end of the hall, the inquisitors sat on a raised dais. Their robes were dark, their faces hidden in hoods, but the weight of their presence pressed down like stone upon the traveler's chest. Behind them, tapestries depicted scenes of judgment and punishment. In each, the condemned appeared to plead, not with words, but with silent eyes that spoke of fear beyond imagining. The traveler's chains clinked as he was forced forward. Every step sounded deafening in the silence, every breath like an accusation. The inquisitor's eyes, or the shadows where their eyes should be, seemed to follow him, reading his every thought, weighing his very soul. "You stand accused," the head inquisitor intoned, voice echoing in the vaulted hall. "But the truth of your heart is what we seek. Speak, and perhaps mercy will follow. Refuse, and you will learn the consequences of hiding from the light of God." The traveler tried to speak, but words failed him. His mind felt frayed, stretched thin by the oppressive darkness and the knowledge that countless others had stood here, trembling, before fading into silence. The walls seemed to close in, and the flicker of torchlight made the iron sconces appear like claws reaching for him. A sudden gust of wind swept through the hall, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible sound. Chains dragging across stone, muffled cries, the whisper of someone or something watching. The traveler's heart pounded in rhythm with the ancient pulse of the castle. And then, as the inquisitors leaned forward in unison, their faces still hidden, the head inquisitor whispered a word that chilled him to the bone. "Tomorrow, you will enter the chamber." That night, sleep eluded the traveler. The cell seemed smaller, the darkness heavier, and every sound, the drip of water, the distant clank of chains, the faint groan of stone, felt magnified, echoing in his mind long after it had faded. When dawn came, he was escorted deeper into the castle, far below the corridors he had already traversed. The air grew colder, damper, and carried a metallic tang that set his teeth on edge. Torches flickered along the walls, revealing the chamber for the first time. A vast, vaulted room, stone-lined and cavernous, filled with shadows that seemed to crawl across the walls. The chamber smelled of iron and smoke, of old wood and something less tangible. A sense of anguish that clung to the air like fog. Instruments hung along the walls, their purpose suggested rather than shown. Iron clasps, chains, devices that seemed to move on their own in the torchlight. None were revealed in detail, but the shapes alone inspired a fear that gnawed at the traveler's stomach. A low murmur rose from somewhere in the darkness, almost like a chant, almost like a warning. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows shifting as though alive. The traveler understood then that the chamber was not just a place of physical torment. It was a place designed to unravel the mind, to turn uncertainty and fear into a tangible, inescapable weight. The guards left him momentarily, and in that silence, he could hear the faintest echoes of past visitors. Footsteps pacing, whispers of confession, the soft scrape of chains across stone. The air seemed to thrum with expectation, as if the chamber itself were aware of him, waiting. Then, from the far corner, a voice, hoarse, soft, almost conspiratorial, broke the silence. "You're not the first to wonder why this place exists, and you won't be the last to regret knowing." The traveler's breath caught. Someone was here with him, someone who knew more. The traveler turned toward the voice, eyes straining in the dim torchlight. A figure emerged from the shadows. A man, gaunt and hollow-eyed, chained to the wall, his clothes ragged. His presence carried the weight of time spent in darkness, a quiet warning etched into every line of his face. "You shouldn't be here," the prisoner rasped, voice barely above a whisper. "Few leave this chamber without something broken inside, and some never leave at all." The traveler swallowed hard, heart hammering. "Who are you?" he asked. "Names are useless here," the man replied. "Call me what you will. What matters is what you must know. This castle, it feeds on fear. The inquisitors, they are not the worst part. It's the chamber itself. The walls, the air, even the stones. They twist what you think, make you doubt what you see, strip you of certainty." "How?" the traveler asked, though a part of him already feared he knew the answer. The prisoner leaned closer, his eyes flicking toward the shadows as if afraid they would overhear. "It's the waiting, the not knowing, the pressure. You feel watched because you are. You hear things because you do. Every scream, every whisper, every creak, it is meant to unmake you. And when they finally confront you, you will be so frayed, so hollow that confession or whatever they demand comes easily. Not from choice but from fear itself." The traveler's stomach turned. The chamber was not merely a place of punishment. It was a machine, meticulously crafted to erode the mind, to extract truth or submission by unseen hands. The prisoner's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Listen to me. You may think you can endure, you may think you can resist, but the chamber is patient. It waits, and it always wins." As the words sank in, a distant sound echoed through the vaulted stone. A dragging chain, slow, deliberate, drawing closer. The traveler felt the shadows stretch toward him, cold and knowing, and realized that his time was running out. Hours? Or was it days? Passed in the chamber. The traveler lost all sense of time. The flickering torches cast shadows that grew taller, darker, as if the walls themselves were alive, watching, waiting. Every sound seemed amplified. The whisper of wind through cracks in the stone, the distant scrape of iron, the soft, almost imperceptible sigh of someone, or something, breathing in the dark. The prisoner's warnings haunted him. He felt the chamber's presence pressing against him, a weight on his chest, a gnawing tension at the edges of his mind. Sleep became impossible. Dreams dissolved into visions of shadowed figures, faces twisted in silent screams. Each blink seemed to stretch seconds into eternities, each heartbeat a drum echoing in the stone vault. He noticed subtle things he had not before. The torches burned differently near certain corners. The shadows seemed to move independently, and sometimes he could swear that the whispering had words meant just for him. Fear was no longer external, it had taken residence inside him. The guards came occasionally, silent and impassive, their eyes unreadable. They said nothing, yet every glance, every gesture seemed to remind him of his helplessness. The prisoner's presence was the only comfort, yet even he seemed diminished by the chamber's weight. Then the traveler felt it, an almost imperceptible pull in the pit of his stomach, a realization that the chamber did not merely test endurance or patience. It was not a place for the body alone. It reached into thought, twisting certainty into doubt, courage into hesitation. Every plan, every hope, every memory seemed unreliable. He sank to the cold floor, trembling, and whispered to the prisoner, "How do you survive this?" The other man's eyes gleamed with a strange, hollow light. "You don't. You only endure. And pray that when they decide to confront you, the part of you they want to break isn't all that remains." A sudden clatter from the shadows made the traveler flinch. The air shifted, cold and heavy, as though something unseen had moved closer. And in that moment, he realized that the chamber had noticed him, and the chamber always claimed its due. The chamber was lined with strange devices, their forms twisted and sinister, each one crafted with a purpose known only to those who designed them. The traveler could make out the shapes in the torchlight. Iron clamps that seemed eager to grip, chains that dangled like waiting serpents, and wheels of cold, blackened wood whose purpose was whispered of in legends. The prisoner gestured to the walls, voice low. "These are not merely tools of flesh. They are tools of fear. Each has a way of drawing something from the mind, turning doubt into panic, hope into despair." The traveler shivered. "But they're not real yet. They're just objects." "Objects?" the prisoner repeated, eyes narrowing. "Objects only become real when the mind believes in them. Watch long enough, and the shadows here will show you the truth of what they can do. The imagination becomes a tormentor, and the body is forced to follow." The traveler could see the subtle craftsmanship in every device. Leather straps reinforced with iron, mechanisms that clicked faintly even when untouched, and hooks that hung like silent threats from the walls. Some seemed designed to hold, others to stretch not just the body but the will. And above them all, the walls themselves seemed to radiate a cold intent, as though the stones remembered every moment of suffering ever inflicted here. "The inquisitors know that fear is more pliable than flesh," the prisoner whispered. "They cultivate it, feed it, and the chamber multiplies it, turning whispers into screams, doubts into madness." The traveler realized with a sinking heart that survival here would require more than courage. It would require understanding the nature of fear itself, and perhaps even embracing it. A sudden echo of a door creaking somewhere deep in the chamber made both men stiffen. The air seemed to pulse with expectation, and the traveler understood that sooner than he dared imagine. His trial, or something far worse, would begin. The traveler had spent what felt like endless hours in the chamber, listening to whispers, counting shadows, and feeling the walls press against his thoughts. Each moment stretched, testing his mind and will. And yet, a thought began to grow, one small, desperate hope. There must be a way out. He moved quietly along the damp stone walls, testing doors and alcoves. Some led only to darkness, others to dead ends, but his persistence drove him onward. The prisoner watched him silently, shaking his head. "Many have tried," he murmured. "Few even reach this point. The castle enjoys patience more than cruelty." It waits for despair to do the work it cannot. Despite the warning, the traveler pressed on. A loose stone in the floor caught his eye. It was slightly raised, almost imperceptible, and the faint draft beneath suggested a hidden passage. Heart pounding, he began to pry at it, the sound of metal scraping against stone echoing in the chamber. The prisoner leaned closer, whispering, "If you open that, you may escape, but beware. The castle has eyes in places you cannot see. It knows who moves, even in shadows." The traveler's hands trembled, but he forced himself to focus. Slowly, inch by inch, the stone shifted, revealing a narrow tunnel that descended into darkness. A rush of cold air flowed from it, carrying both promise and danger. He hesitated. The prisoner's warning rang in his ears, and the shadows seemed to deepen, almost reaching for him. But the longing for freedom was stronger than the fear of the unknown. As he began to crawl into the tunnel, a distant, echoing laugh rolled through the chamber. It was low, deliberate, and carried a weight that froze his blood. Something or someone was waiting for him in the dark. The traveler moved carefully through the narrow tunnel, the cold stone scraping his hands, the shadows pressing close as if alive. Each step was measured, silent, yet the echo of the castle followed him, twisting and stretching behind every sound. At the end of the tunnel, he emerged into a hidden chamber. The room was smaller than the main hall, dimly lit by a single torch that flickered like a heartbeat. And there, carved into the walls and floor, were symbols, strange runes and marks that seemed to pulse faintly in the torchlight. A sudden noise made him whirl around. Behind a curtain of shadows stood a figure, cloaked and still. The traveler froze. Then, in a voice low and chilling, the figure spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The traveler's heart raced, but curiosity overrode fear. "Who are you? What is this place?" The figure stepped closer, and the torchlight revealed a face both familiar and terrible. The prisoner he had spoken with in the chamber, but changed somehow, eyes glowing with a strange intensity. "You think the inquisitors rule this castle?" the man said. "No, they are merely instruments. This castle, it is alive. It thrives on fear, yes, but more than that, it feeds on the secrets of those who enter. Every confession, every doubt, every whispered thought becomes part of its walls. And some it keeps forever." The traveler staggered back. "Keeps forever?" The figure nodded, voice low and resonant. "Do you understand now why the chamber exists? It is not just punishment. It is collection. The castle remembers all who enter, and some of those memories are never released." A cold wind swept through the chamber, carrying the faint sound of voices, echoes of past prisoners, some pleading, some laughing, some whispering warnings he could barely comprehend. The traveler realized, with a sickening clarity, that escape might not save him. The castle did not merely imprison the body. It captured the soul, twisting it into its own eternal shadow. And then the figure stepped closer, eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "Now you belong to it too." The traveler stumbled backward, heart hammering, the cold torchlight flickering against the walls that seemed to pulse with memory. The figure before him, the prisoner, the herald of the castle's secret, was no longer fully human. His eyes glowed with the reflections of countless fears, and his voice echoed like a chorus of the damned. "You thought escape would free you," the figure said. "But freedom is an illusion here. Once the castle knows your fear, your doubts, your secrets, you belong to it forever." The traveler's mind raced, frantically searching for a way out. The tunnel he had discovered earlier now seemed impossibly distant, swallowed by darkness and silence. Every shadow flickered as though alive, whispering his name, drawing him into the stone itself. He tried to run, but the corridors twisted unnaturally, changing with every step. What had seemed like a straight path now led him in circles, the walls rearranging themselves to trap him deeper in the fortress's bowels. The torches sputtered, shadows stretched, and the air grew thick, almost tangible, pressing against his chest. From the darkness came faint, chilling laughter. Voices he had heard in the chamber. The prisoner's warning, whispers of the inquisitors, cries of those long gone, merged into a single unending echo. The traveler realized he was no longer merely in a castle, but inside the memory of fear itself. He stumbled into a room, empty but for the faint outline of someone or something watching from the shadows. The air shimmered, and for a brief moment, he glimpsed the faces of all who had come before him. Hollow-eyed, trembling, trapped in the walls, yet alive in the castle's memory. A whisper brushed his ear. "They all stay, and now so do you." The traveler screamed, but the sound was swallowed immediately by the stone. The shadows receded for an instant, leaving only silence. And then the walls seemed to breathe again, carrying the weight of centuries of fear, judgment, and secrets yet untold. The castle stood silent in the moonlight, its towers jagged against the sky. To any outsider, it was merely stone and iron, abandoned yet foreboding. But within, the echoes of those who entered and never left remained, waiting for the next soul drawn to its shadowed embrace. And somewhere deep beneath, the traveler's own fear joined the chorus, another whisper in the castle that never forgets. The end for now.